Shalom Aleichem to Aryeh, and to Mata Esther, and Zahava, and Katie, and hopefully Yael is watching, and of course my mother, and Avital, and Shana Batsheva, and everybody who joins us every week. Bezras Hashem, and David, of course. Shalom Aleichem. So we're going to continue in Torah Lamed, Bezras Hashem, lesson 30, in just a second. As soon as the technical crew attaches my microphone, does my makeup, we're ready to go. Okay. So what we're learning in this lesson is trying to grasp Hashem. We started off with this strange story of Rabbi Hanina ben Dosa and the elders of Athens, and Shalom Aleichem to Joe from Melbourne, Australia. It must be like the next day in Melbourne or something. I don't know what time it is. The morning in Melbourne, Chaim. Start off with the strange story of how do you harvest a garden of knives? You harvest it with the horn of a donkey. And this apparently is some code language that we'll find out eventually. And they said, we'll bring you 2 eggs. Tell us which egg came from a black chicken, which one came from a white chicken. He said, I'll bring you guys 2 pieces of feta cheese. Tell me which one came from a white goat, which one came from a black goat. And at the end, we're going to understand that. So that's how we started off. And then Rabbi Nachman says, trying to grasp Hashem, the only way you can grasp Hashem is through tzimtzumim rabim, through lots of contractions. So Hashem contracts the light and contracts the light and contracts the light until we're able to grasp something of Hashem. And if I just want to simplify the concept of grasping something from Hashem, so the idea of tzedakah, that the fact that it's a mitzvah, and that Hashem commands us to give tzedakah. That's not something that most people would normally do, and many people, myself included, struggle with the mitzvah of tzedakah, meaning that you want to give tzedakah, but then to actually give the money, the Yetzer Hara comes and says, should you really be giving the money? Does that person deserve the money? Can I afford to part with the money? And there's all kinds of excuses that come up, but Hashem says, no, it's a commandment. You give 10%, a minimum of 10% of your earnings. And of course, there were people not just in the old days, in modern days, that don't have any money to give tzedakah. So I know on the Moshav, in Reb Shlomo's Moshav, here in Modi'in, what they would do when the Chevre were there and they were all impoverished, is everybody would give 10% and someone else would give them 10%. And so everybody was exchanging 10%. And there's even a story that I told on the podcast one time about this. And the Rebbe in the story said that the Jew that came to him that was doing this gave him a lot of pleasure. It was he and his friend. He and his friend didn't have enough money to give tzedakah, so they exchanged it. Now, this is something that comes from Hashem. Because if we're just going on the human level, I mentioned before Seneca, who was one of the great Roman philosophers, and his writings are still around today. They've been repopularized by Tim Ferriss, who wrote the 4-Hour Work Week, and he's become very popular ever since. And I'm sure there's a lot of wisdom in Seneca, but one of the things that Seneca argued was that the Jews were fools because they didn't work 7 days a week. And in those days, people lived off of the land. So if you really stopped working 7 days and you took 1 day off, that was 1 day less of food that you had, or your crops might have gone bad, or your animals, there might have been problems with them, who knows what. And what was the answer of the Jews? Well, Hashem told us that we're not allowed to work on Shabbos, so I don't care what this wise man says, we're not working on Shabbos. So what I'm describing to you now, mitzvot, like these practical mitzvot, is the tzimtzum, is the contraction of Hashem into this world. That's how you see it in a practical way. And when a person gives tzedakah, certain mitzvot you have to think about, you have to understand them. For example, the mitzvah of Yetziat Mitzrayim, of telling your children that we left Egypt at the Seder. You have to understand what it means to leave Egypt in order to tell your children what it is to leave Egypt. When it comes to the mitzvah of tzedakah, You don't have to understand anything. You don't have to open your mind or your heart. You have to open your hand. And somebody comes and you have to give the money to that person. Like if it's a righteous person that the money should be given to them. Easy. If you know somebody who's in need and you give them tzedakah, you know for sure you gave tzedakah. The guys that come around shul, I don't know how many of them are really tzedakah and others have mental issues, especially in the shuk. And when you give to institutions, who knows how much of it actually gets to tzedakah or not. But this idea of tzedakah comes down through the tzimtzum. That's the reason I mentioned it. Okay? And every person has to try to grasp Hashem in the way that they can. And to understand Hashem on whichever level they're capable of doing it. And I mentioned this on Shabbos, Ari was there, and I mentioned it also last Shabbos, this one sentence in this lesson here, where he says, "Asakot alakut l'schut ledat Kadosh Baruch Hu lefi kocho, zo hatachlit shekol adam mechuyav ba." In order to grasp Hashem, to understand Hashem, everybody on their level, this is the bottom line. This is the purpose of creation that every person is obligated to do. So we are obligated to come close to Hashem, to understand Hashem, to connect with Hashem. We do that through the mitzvot. The mitzvot are the infinite reaching out to the finite. That is the definition of a mitzvah. Hashem, who is the Or Ein Sof, is the endless light, is the infinite light, is reaching out to us in this finite world, in this finite body, in order to allow us to connect with Him, and that's how we come to know Hashem. Now we're going to go deeper into this idea of tzimtzum, of contraction. And he's bringing quotes from the Zohar. So, every time we get into Zohar, we're going to get into kind of complicated stuff, but we're going to plow through it, and Bezrat Hashem, we're going to understand it. לאחר שביאר שרק הרבי הגדול מאוד יכול לצמצם ולהלביש את השכל הגדול והעליון על השגות אלוקות בשכל התחתון. So this is something that was mentioned before, that in order to grasp the major organizations, okay, that was from Judith. Hi, Judith, Shalom Aleichem. She says that the major organizations are audited and you can tell how much goes to tzedakah. I personally like to give to people, families and people that I know, tachlis, straight to them. But the organizations, I'm sure, do good things. Okay, so before he mentioned that in order for us to grasp Hashem, we have to have a great teacher. He says a great rabbi, a great rebbe. And I mentioned to you the difference between a rebbe and a rabbi from Reb Shlomo. Did I mention that? Okay. So I mentioned on the podcast. Reb Shlomo Karlibach, he said, what's the difference between a rabbi and a rebbe? So I heard this from Rebbe Gestetner at Ma'anot. So he said, when you're driving in the old days before you had Waze and you didn't know where you were going, so you pulled into a gas station and you asked for directions. That's a rabbi. Don't know where you're going, you ask for directions. He says, but what happens when your tank is running low on gas? You pull into the gas station and you fill up the car with gas. That's the Rebbe. The Rebbe fills up your tank to keep you going. The rabbi gives you direction, the Rebbe fills up your tank. So when I was recording it on the podcast, I said, the Rebbe gives you gas. And then I realized, okay, got to say that again. The Rebbe doesn't give you gas. The Rebbe fills up your tank. I should have left it at the end as a blooper, but I deleted it early on and I couldn't put it back in. Okay, so in order to understand Hashem, we have to have the tzimtzum, we have to have the contraction. And who's going to teach us about the contraction? We need a great Rebbe, and the greater the Rebbe, the greater we can learn. So for example, we have Rebbe Nachman, and we're using Rebbe Nachman as the great Rebbe that's giving us these lessons, and these lessons are Rebbe Nachman trying to verbalize his understanding of Hashem. So he says the greater the rabbi, the greater the higher intellect, and then it can come down into our lower intellect. Until the people on the lowest level, like me, I won't say you, but like me, we can understand Hashem. Now he's going to explain that this is the secret of hair. Hair, this stuff. This is the secret of hair. Shehem hanbashat chokhmah ha'ilaa, hamochin, b'chokhma tata, sa'arot, malchut. What is hair? Hair symbolizes the enclothing of wisdom, of supernal wisdom, the mind, the intellect, in the lower wisdom, which is the hair, which is malchut. So I told you, once we start getting to Zohar, we start getting into complicated things. Okay, let's just go. I read a lot. There's also good explanations in this Sefer, Bezrat Hashem. We'll go to there as well. This idea that the higher intellect can be enclosed in the lower intellect, ze b'chinat sa'arot. This is the concept of hair. Kamo she'herat ha'mochin sfirat chokhma yotzin b'hasa'arot sfirat ha'malchut. And what he's saying is that a person's thinking and understanding comes out through their hair. He's saying that the thinking is chokhmah and the hair is malchut. So malchut is always the receptacle. Malchut, if you remember, do I still have it here? I do. Malchut is the lowest sphira, the lowest one, and it receives from all of the above. So when we say that the hair is receiving the chokhmah, is receiving the wisdom, so somehow whatever's going on in the brain, intellectually it's expressing itself in a person's hair. Now I know that when I was preparing for the lesson, I was reading that the Arizal, he was able to look at a person's face, hands, wrinkles, lines, hair, everything, and tell everything about the person. He could tell everything that they'd done, everything they would do. Now I think it was probably beyond just looking at the face. But he had the ability. I have a chavruta, should be healthy, bezrat Hashem, Awan ben Chanadiba. He knows how to read palms. I've learned a few things from him, a few of the lines. But it's an actual science. Like it's not a Jewish thing. It's a general thing. You can read about it online. And the same thing with reading a person's face. It's possible to read a person's face. So apparently within the hair, there's something that can be read and understood if the person is on a high enough level, which is really what Rabbi Nachman is trying to say here. He's saying if you meet a rabbi, and the rabbi is on a high enough intellectual level that he can explain godliness in a simple way that you and I can understand it, that is the analogy of hair. Meaning that hair is, within the hair, you can read about what a person is and you can learn about that person if you have the skill to do it. That's what he's saying at this point. And so it is the supernal intellect which is grasping godliness, that the rabbi was able to understand. This is enclosed in the lower intellect, meaning klomar, that is to say, שהערות השכל העליון אינה נראית ונתגלית אלא על ידי יציאתה והתפלשותה בשכל התחתון. So let's take, I'm going to explain what I just read in giving an example from Rabbi Nachman. Rabbi Nachman, let's picture Rabbi Nachman. He's probably very thin because he fasted a lot and he was sick. Died at 38, so he was probably a pretty young guy. Wearing tefillin all day. Sitting and meditating and davening and learning, and at some point he has like this thought. He has like a godly thought. And he wants to take that thought and bring it down and explain it to the Hasidim. So he meditates on it and he thinks about it, and then the day comes that he feels like, okay, he's ready to give it over. He tells the Hasidim, come, I want to share with you something that I've learned. And he starts off with a passage. Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa met the elders of Athens, and they talked about how do you harvest a garden of knives. And he says you harvest the garden of knives with the horn of a donkey. And what Rabbi Nachman is doing is he's enclothing the godliness in his intellect and bringing it down to a level that we can understand, which is exactly what we're doing right here. So we are experiencing what Rabbi Nachman is saying in his lesson through, it's like a movie within a movie. We are experiencing what he's saying within this lesson right here. that Rabbi Nachman himself is the great rabbi that's enclothing godliness in words in a way that we can understand. That's what he said right here. If I go back and just read the words again, Shehu asagot elakut, which is grasping godliness, sheisig harav, that the rabbi grasped, hu mitlabesh ba'asechel hatachton, the rabbi is able to transfer it on a lower intellectual level, klamar ha'arat hasechel elyon, that is to say that the supernal intellect, that a spark of the supernal intellect, einan neret v'nitgalet, cannot be revealed and cannot be shown, ela al yedei yetziata, but only through its exit, v'hitlapshuta, and its enclothing, b'sechel hatachton, in the lower intellect. Shalom aleichem. See, people are joining the lesson, so shalom aleichem to everybody who's joining us. Atavi Yivaer, now he's going to explain Inyan Hasarot an pi ma she'amar Yitro Moshe. Now he's going to explain this idea of the hair and what's enclosed in hair on a Kabbalistic level, not on a fashion level. Using the example of Yitro, Jethro, who spoke to Moshe. V'ata tichazeh mikol ha'am. You are going to be the one who sees everything for the whole nation, and you're going to appoint Aleph, Anshe Chayil. How would you translate Anshe Chayil? I guess people of strength. Bet, Yirei Elokim, those that fear God. Gimel, Anshe Emet, people of truth. Daled, Sonei Betza, Sonei Vatza. Amivua B'tikunim, Sonei Vatza B'pchinat Se'ara. Okay. So if I remember correctly, Sonei Batza are people that are not into materialism, right? It's going to be explained in the tikkunim of white hair and round hair and black hair. Now we're getting deeper and deeper into the Kabbalah. But we have a rope to pull ourselves out, so we won't get so deep that we'll get stuck. And this is what's brought in Tikkunei Azor. This is in Tikkun Ayin Daf Kuf Chaf Gimel, in case anybody wants to look it up for reference. Se'ara be'i gula. Se'ar rosh hu agol. So I have curly hair. I don't know if Ari, it doesn't look like you have curly hair. When my hair is grown, you can see it. And on my beard, for sure you can. So he's saying, it says in the Zohar that hair is curly. Now, we know that curly hair is a Middle Eastern trait. If I was black, it would be an African trait, but since I'm a white Ashkenazi, it's a Middle Eastern trait. And so I'm assuming that the reason that he's saying that hair is curly is because in Jewish circles in those days, probably most people had curly hair. Sa'ar rosh hu agol, the hair on the person's head is circular, is curly. Shekein golgolet harosh hu kekado, and so a person's head is like a ball. It's like a sphere. V'lechen gam asar she'aleh hu agol, and so therefore that's why a person's hair is curly, because the head is round and so the hair is round. B'pchinat sibuvim. This is the aspect of surrounding. Now, when we're learning Zohar, we're learning everything here is a metaphor, is symbolic. So he's not just talking about, I guess in the world of whoever was writing down this from the Zohar, everybody's head was round and everybody's hair was curly, and so that explains it. But what he's really trying to say is that this is related to sibuvim, surrounding, dahainu. That is to say, שרומז על הקדמות המסבבים עד שבאים אל המכוון כנ"ל. What is this hinting at? That our head is round and the hair is round. It's hinting at that we have to give introductions and examples that go around the subject of understanding Hashem until we finally get to the point that we understand Hashem. We can't understand Hashem without explaining it in a roundabout way. From Yael, she says on a Kabbalistic level, not on a fashion level, and that's a quote. Quote. You have to put a trademark next to the quote. Perush, the meaning is, the hair symbolizes the lower level of the intellect, meaning us trying to understand Hashem. Shehu mishalim v'hakdamot shehachacham maspir otam betchila. These are the analogies and the introductions that the rabbi or the wise person is using to explain them in the beginning. Ad ve'al yadam mivinim talmidav mechuvan. And through all of these analogies, then the students begin to understand the intention, which is trying to understand Hashem, shehu sechel elyon, which is the supernal intellect. So if I want to bring it back down and just make it clearer, if we're trying to understand why should I give tzedakah? So let's say for a person this is a new concept, or why should I keep Shabbos? Or why should I keep kosher? Or why should I keep any of the mitzvot? So the real answer is because Hashem commanded us. Why did Hashem command us? Because Hashem is the sechel elyon. Hashem is the supernal intellect. So you can say, but I can't relate to the supernal intellect. I'm a human being. I live in a dog-eat-dog world. I want to eat whatever I want. I want to take from whatever person I want, and I don't want to give tzedakah and keep Shabbos, and I don't want to be restricted. And this is the natural way that a person would speak. And so in order for a person, of course, a person that grows up with these things, that's their habit. But a person like me, it's about tshuva. So I had to come to some understanding in order to keep them. In the beginning, you just keep them, but at some point you have to come to an understanding. You won't want to do them anymore. So that's the sechel elyon. And that's what we're trying to grasp. We're trying to understand why should I be doing these mitzvot? Where is the source of this? And that's coming from a higher place in heaven. We have rabbis and teachers to explain it to us, and we want to understand. And the main thing is to understand to try to understand what is Hashem's intention. That through analogies and explanations, we're going to understand Hashem. We're going to understand Hashem's idea behind why we would be doing these things. As we found an analogy, an example for this, the sages of blessed memory in Yevamot Tet Zayin, the Inyan Hadin Shel Tzarat Habat, regarding the matter of the daughter's rival. So the daughter's rival is this very complicated thing. If there's, let's say, two brothers, one is married, or both are married. One has children, the other doesn't. The one that doesn't have children dies, so the brother that's still alive, he is obligated to marry his sister-in-law, to give her children. But he can say that he doesn't want to marry her, and then he throws there's a special shoe. I forgot what the shoe is called. Do you remember? Something like that, yeah.
She's called a chalutza.
Chalutza? So my wife, she said she saw the ceremony once. That you throw the shoe and you spit and something like that. And then the woman is released out of that obligation. So that's what we're talking about here. Tzarat habat. She'nechlaku bo Beit Shammai u Beit Hillel. So Beit Shammai and Beit Hillel, two rabbinical houses of study or understanding of halacha, they disagreed over this. V'chachamim savru she'Rabbi Dosa ben Hokanas pasak kebeit Shammai. And the rabbis agreed with Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanas that he went along with the house of Hillel. Shetzarat habat muteret, that it's permitted to uphold the ceremony. V'alchu lebeito lish'ol oto al kach, and they went to his house to ask him why he judged this way. Ulam mechemat how do you say this word? Hetayeru shelo yirtze la'anot lehem, but because he made up excuses for not wanting to answer them, l'chein betchila sibevuhu ba'alachot acharot. So when they went to Rabbi Dosa ben Horkanas, they asked him, explain why you follow Beit Shammai. And he didn't want to answer them directly because he knew that if he answered them directly, they wouldn't understand his explanation and they would say, oh, you're full of nonsense. So he said, okay, I'm aware of this. Don't worry, take it. I'm aware of this. So he said, I'm going to start by talking about other halachot before I talk about this halacha. Ad shehigiu letzarat habat, until they reached the daughter's rival. Va'az sha'alu oto mahi halacha b'inyan zeh. And then they asked him, what's the halacha in this matter? Nimtza shekol halachot shedibru im Rabbi Dosa mekotem. It follows that all of the halachas that Rabbi Dosa was talking about beforehand, lo hayu ikar hamechuvan. They were not the main point. Rak hayu sibuvim v'akdamot. They were just a roundabout way in a preface, kedei la'agia l'she'elat tzarat habat, in order to reach the point of talking about the daughter's rival, shehu hamechuvan, which is what they came there for, and which was the main point. Ki tzarat habat romezet an tzino tsar, because the daughter's rival hints at a very narrow conduit or pipe. Ke'en hase'arot besamuch, like the hair that's, I'm not sure exactly what that's saying there, shel habat, of the daughter, hainu shechina, that is the shechina, shehi mitzamtzemet et sechel elyon, which contracts the supernal intellect, chochma ilah, the higher intellect, bitzino tsar, in a very narrow conduit or a tunnel or a pipe, b'bchinat sechel tachton, that's the aspect of the lower intellect, kadesh nuchal la'asigo, in order for us to understand it. Now, if we hadn't learned literally hundreds of lessons in Likutey Moharan, I wouldn't know what I just read there. But what he's saying, because he made a few jumps there, he's saying, okay, first we have the example of Rabbi Dosa, and he judged in a way that people did not expect him to judge, and something that is a very rare thing. So this group of people comes to him and they say, explain to us why you judge that way. And he says, okay, I can't explain it to them directly. I have to give it in a roundabout way. And when he did it in a roundabout way, then they came to ask him, oh, okay, so now that we understand all of these things, what is the halacha regarding the daughter's rival? And because he gave it in a roundabout way, he was able to explain to them in a way that they could understand. He says, what is this daughter's rival symbolizing? It symbolizes the Shekhinah. What is the Shekhinah? The Shekhinah is Hashem's revelation in this world. Hashem cannot reveal himself fully in this world, because otherwise we wouldn't have free will and there'd be no reason for the world to exist. So Hashem's presence is revealed in the Shekhinah, which is Hashem, but it's just a little aspect of Hashem. In a sense, you could say, when we're reading the Torah, that's a good example. We're reading the Torah, we're reading a book that Hashem wrote. Imagine, we read Harry Potter, it's the book that J.K. Rowling wrote. And we're like, wow, she's a great writer. She's very talented. But imagine you could read the book that God wrote. We have the book that God wrote. And through the book that God wrote, we can get a little feeling of who God is, but we can't really know who God is. So that's the point here, that with the Shekhinah, we get a revelation of God, but we don't get the full-on revelation of God, otherwise we couldn't exist. V'zeh ha'se'ara be'igula, this the curly hair, we're going to stop in like 5 minutes or less. He gam b'bchinat hamuva b'tikunei hazohar. This is also brought in the Tikunei hazohar. Se'ara ukama, which is the black hairs, and they symbolize mesitra de shchinta, tzearot shchorot shehem mitzad sfirat malchut. So the black hair is connected to malchut, b'bchinat sechel tachton, which is connected to the lower level of the intellect, which is connected to the Shekhinah. I don't have any black hair left. B'bchinat hakatuv, it's related to shchora ani v'nava. I am dark and I am beautiful. Akavana bazeh, and the intention of this is ki ha-shacharut, achelek ha-shachor be'emtza ha'ayin, the pupil, which is the black dot in the middle of your eye, hanikret ishon, which is called ishon, hu mekabetz et hareut. It contracts the vision. Koach hariyah shel ha'adam shemetzamtzem oto kedei lerot hetev. It contracts, so I'm looking at Aryeh, for example, and I'm seeing the whole wall here, and I'm seeing Aryeh, and I'm seeing the camera, and I'm seeing all of this, and it all comes through this little spot in my eye. So he says, in order for that to come through, all of that has to be contracted, because obviously the dot in my eye is very small, and everything out here is very big. Tzimtzum na'aseh al yedei kach shekol ma she'adam ro'eh. The contraction is done through such a way that everything that a person sees, mishtakef b'ishon ha'ayin, is included is contracted in your pupil. And so when a person looks at another person, kol ha'adam gadol, this whole big person, nir'eh b'toch ha'ishon kamo b'mar'ah. It appears in a person's eye, in the pupil, like it does as it actually appears. But rather it's contracted and it's a small image. And so our lower intellect is like the black hair that contracts within it the beauty. I guess both words are beauty. I don't know how you say the difference between Nava and Yofi. Shebesechel Halyon, that's in the supernal intellect. Shub Chinat Amochin de Chochma, which is the intellect of the intellect. Hainu Asagot Elokut Sheyisig Rav, that is the grasping of godliness that the rabbi understood. Shebeoto Hu Rotze Lelamed, that those understandings the rabbi wants to teach the student. And through the lower intellect, which is the blackness, which is the constriction, through a good rabbi, through somebody, and I've mentioned again and again, we can use Rabbi Nachman as the example. Rabbi Nachman can take the beauty of trying to understand Hashem and give it over to us in a way that we can grasp a little bit of it. So that's where we are. In this section, we're going to stop there for tonight. This still goes for a while until we get to the next section. So Bezrat Hashem, we'll continue. So this was an interesting thing. I've been using a lot of AI lately. I'm working on putting my Baal Shem Tov book together. And so I used AI to transcribe all the stories of the Baal Shem Tov from the podcast. And now I have almost 400 pages of stories, but they're not perfectly transcribed, so I need them edited. And also when I talk, I don't speak like in the proper tenses and I make mistakes and all kinds of things. So I'm using AI now to clean it up. And bless you. As I was trying to think, okay, I want a story of Reb Zusha. Of course, for Yael. I always have to collect stories. Reb Zusha. So I typed I'm using two different AIs. I'm using Claude and ChatGPT. I'm using them in tandem. So I typed into ChatGPT, can you find a story of Reb Zusha that takes about 5 minutes to tell? So it starts putting out stories, and I read, I know that one. It gives me another one. Like, oh, I don't know that one. But it gave it to me very short. So I said, can you give me like the full-on version of the story? And just tick, 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 it starts putting it out. If you want to know what's going to replace Google, now I didn't go to Google to search for it. I went to ChatGPT. And I just experienced where the future is going. The future is going into ChatGPT or some AI search engine, because it's pretty amazing. Because it does more than just searching. Then it gives you the sources and it brings in different sources. Okay. So that was the introduction to the story, which kind of blew my mind. It's nice to be in the early days of revolutionary changes. We'll see where it takes us. So I love how it starts off here. I also asked it to tell it in the style of Reb Shlomo. So he says, "Holy precious friends, let me tell you the deepest story." He did a really good job. The story is going to mamish open your hearts. Sometimes in the darkness of the night, the holiest light shines through. This is AI. It's Awesome, what could I say? Okay, we all know Reb Zusha, the holy great tzaddik. Now, this is me talking, not reading here. The holy great tzaddik Reb Zusha. So he would collect money for poor families and go and distribute the money. And one time, he's walking at night, going to this little village to give very little money that he'd collected to these poor families. And just as he's walking on the road, out of nowhere, a group of thieves jumps out behind a tree, and they have knives and all kinds of weapons. And they say to Reb Zusha, give us everything you have, give us all your money. So he lifts up his hands, he says, okay, and he reaches in his pocket, and he gives them the coins that he had for tzedakah. And they take it, and they're quite happy with themselves. And he's sitting on the side, and the thieves are counting this little bit of money, and Reb Zusha starts to cry. Oh, he's really crying. Oh, like from the deepest place in his heart. And one of the thieves, who of course happened to be Jewish, he comes over and he says to Zusha, what are you doing? Are you crying because you're an old man and we stole your money? And Reb Zusha said, no, I'm crying. And of course, Zusha never said I. He said, Zusha is crying because Zusha had the opportunity now to help another person. And all I had was a little bit of money. And you obviously need a lot of money. Otherwise, why would you be robbing somebody in the middle of the night who's walking to do a mitzvah, giving tzedakah? Obviously, you need the money more than this poor family, so I'm crying to Hashem. Hashem, you gave me an opportunity to do the mitzvah of helping another person, and you gave me so little money. You should have given me a lot of money. So this one thief, Yankel, he goes over to the other thieves, and they said, no, what's with the old Jew? He says, you won't believe what he told me. He's crying that he didn't have enough money to give us. Because he said, obviously, if we're stealing money, then we need more money than he had. And the other thieves thought he was an idiot, and they just ran away. But Yankel, he stood there and he went to Reb Zusha, and he said, I can't believe that you're actually crying that you didn't have enough money to give us. And he said, you really touched me. So Reb Zusha said, let me tell you, the deepest Torahs. He starts teaching this guy Yankel Torahs. And not the Torahs like halacha, not regular Torahs, but Torahs that speak to your heart. And Torahs that light the spark in his soul. And Yankel eventually became a student of Reb Zusha. And he would go now and collect money for poor people and give it out. And one time somebody said to him, how did you go from being a thief to collecting tzedakah and a student of Reb Zusha? And he said, I met a man who cried because he couldn't give more to the people that were robbing him. And that's how I learned what real love is. He said, you know what the deepest thing is? He said, when people would ask Reb Zusha about that night, he would say, those weren't thieves who robbed me, those were holy souls waiting to be awakened. The master of the universe just needed someone to cry for them. What a beautiful story. And so, that's the story that the biggest light sometimes comes from the darkest place. I'm going to save this for the podcast in the future. Bezrat Hashem, and thanks to Yael for making me look up a Reb Zusha story. Shur Koach to everyone. We'll continue next week. Bezrat Hashem. Everyone in good health and b'simcha. Hanukkah is now still a few weeks to Hanukkah. Hanukkah is at the end of Kislev. So we still have time. What are we going to say? La la la